Today I'm going to be doing a book review on How to Stop Losing Your Shit, a practical guide to becoming a calmer, happier parent by Carla Naumburg, PhD. And I've read this book, and what I'm going to do in this book review is I'm going to break it down into two parts. I'm doing an overview, and then I'm going to give you my personal opinion. So the first section that she addresses is why things haven't worked in the past. And she addresses things like guilt, which I think are really important. And she addresses myths that using willpower to control yelling at your kids is something that doesn't work. So she tackles that right off the bat, why things maybe in the past have not worked. And then she goes into why we yell. And she does some teaching on the brain, which if you haven't had any sort of learnings on that, that is also super helpful. And she talks about why it's hard because of how our brain works. The third part of it is that she goes into her personal story. And this can be so helpful and relatable. And even if you don't have the same exact circumstances, like the same number of kids or the same age, seeing her process and going through the journey of how to stop losing her shit with her own kids was super helpful to see what she did and what worked for her. And the next thing she talks about, which is probably what a lot of us are interested in, is the triggers, owning our triggers. And she focuses on gaining awareness of them, what the triggers are, kind of broken down into different categories. And what she does here is she has a list of triggers, but you'll find that at the end of the book, so it's not listed in the chapter on triggers. But reading through that, you can get kind of an idea of your own triggers by looking at how she is looking at triggers. Hi. The next several parts go into actually the actions you want to take, the practical advice that she's giving, and in essence, what she's talking about in the subtitle of her book, The Practical Guide. She breaks down her practical guide into two categories. One is the essential, the things that you must do to help you minimize your triggers. So there's the essential and then there's the optional. And the essential involves getting sleep, getting support, and practicing self-care. And then she talks about the optional ones, which is meditating, simplifying your life even further, slowing down, gratitude. These are the things that you can add on after getting the essentials kind of checked off. And then she does address how to handle your anger in the moment. So she has a technique of noticing, pausing, and doing something else.
Mama?
Yeah. So that in the moment, try to notice it by looking at how you feel, what you're thinking, what's happening in your body, so that you can help create that pause so that you can take a different course of action. And then she goes into what to do when you do yell. And she says throughout the book that you're not ever going to stop 100% completely yelling. However, you will reduce it, and when the time comes up, when it does happen, what is it that you can do to repair the relationship with your kids? Yeah, it's recording, but I can cut it out when I edit the video. Okay? So overall, my personal views, I gave this 3 stars out of 5. Now, this is much lower than what a lot of people give on where you can buy the book, the reviews that come up on those websites. It is substantially lower, and she has a ton of 5-star reviews. I'm giving it actually 3 hearts. I give hearts instead of stars because I believe that there's always some wisdom in what something else has to say. So I'd rather give 3 hearts and what I loved about it. So I'll talk about what I did love about it. I think she covers probably the broad sense of what happens when you're yelling, from your triggers all the way what to do to repair. So she covers all of that, and I think that's really excellent. She does cover a very important part, the guilt. There is so much guilt around yelling that comes after. There's so much guilt associated with how we parent that she does address that. And so I really, really like that. And I think that this is a really good book if this is the first time that you are reading anything about emotions, anything about yelling, anything about the brain, because she does cover it, I think this is a really solid book. If you have read other books on anger, on emotions, on triggers, you might find some of the stuff repetitive. And I think that although when she talks about her personal experiences in this book, she is referring to 2 young kids. I do think that the information is still applicable if you have older children. If you have teenagers and you find yourself, you're still yelling. And she also mentions that changing how you yell and approach things, even with older kids, is going to help you and help your relationship with them.
Mama?
Yeah. So why I gave it 3 instead of the full 5 is because I found it a bit disorganized. I only could see how she organized it. Actually, when I went to go do the overview, is that, these are the pieces that go together. And I think that if you're using this book, it is only, I think, around 215 pages. So it is a short book. That referencing it, highlighting when you read through it the first, and then going back to it, you'll have to do some of the work to organize it for yourself and using some of those tools. And in essence, all books are like that. When you read a self-help book, 100% of the work is going to be on you, from buying it to reading it to actually implementing it in your life. It's going to fall on you. And one of the things is that if a book can make it easier to implement in your life, I give it a higher rating. And so for me, I found that I did have to go back through the things to kind of get organized of how she was telling the information, because she does use quite a bit of acronyms, and she has steps that don't always seem, she talks about steps in the beginning and then she has another set of steps, so it can get kind of a little bit disorganized and then confusing when you're reading it for the first time. However, if you have it and then you reference it back, I think that that'll help in implementing it as you use some of the information she's presented. So the other thing that actually some people might like is her humor. She has a lot of humor in there, and it's not my type of humor. However, if you do like it, she's constantly kind of making jokes around it. That might make the easier reading it a lot faster for you. And the one big area where I felt that was where it didn't sit well with me and how I have dealt with my anger and dealt with my yelling is in fact about how she talks about triggers. She talks about avoiding triggers and minimizing triggers. And when you look at triggers in our life, there are so many triggers in our life. In fact, at the end, she has a whole list of different triggers in our life that is just encompassing life. Changing jobs, moving apartments or houses, moving cities, going to school, death in the family. All of those things are triggers, and that is in essence life. And her advice is to avoid or minimize them. And a lot of those triggers we cannot control. And if we go about trying to avoid so many triggers, then I don't really think we get to the root cause of why we are triggered, and then we don't ever really kind of break that cycle of yelling, especially if we're coming from a home where we grew up where there was yelling. Is that if we just go about avoiding and minimizing, then we never really get to that root cause, and then we don't really permanently address our anger in ways that can get long-term understanding and long-term success in any relationship that you want. So that is why I gave it 3 out of 5. So in the end, I recommend this book if this is the first book that you are tackling on how to stop yelling. She does a really good broad overview of the things that are important in to stop yelling, especially the guilt, especially drawing awareness to what triggers you, and use it as a reference guide. And you can use it for any age of your children. And that's all I have for you today. Like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.